Hey guys, this is Tolhi, and this is going to be a subscribers frequently asked questions video based on lessons 1 to 5. So what exactly does that mean? So what I'm thinking is for once you guys, once I do lessons, I'm pretty much guaranteeing you guys are going to have questions. Because I doubt I'm going to explain everything perfect the first time. And that's definitely true of the first set of videos I did from 1 to 5. There was quite a few common mistakes that people made because I didn't explain stuff properly. Well, just not thoroughly enough, I think is the best way to put it, is I didn't make certain things clear. And the only reason I'm in Minecraft right now is because I started recording this in Visual Studio, but I ended up talking to to a text file for a few minutes, so I may as well let you guys see me build something as I chat. But yeah, so these are, what I'm about to show you is two pieces of code from two separate subscribers with similar problems. The reason I picked these in particular is I like these two pieces of code because they're definitely showing that they're trying and they at least understand the concepts. Right, so yeah, they understand the concepts, but I didn't explain things as well as I could, so there's a few mistakes in their code. So I want to review that code and then do what we call, if we programmers call, a code review. So I will go through their code and sort of just help fix mistakes and any problems, and then you guys can learn from those mistakes and problems as well. Although I think most of those mistakes and problems are probably my fault. Anyway, so let's get to the code side of this. Okay, and right into the code here. So we have two pieces of code. We're going to start with this one. So this one here I really liked because it sort of took the idea of making a game, and you tried to make a game out of what I've taught so far. And to be quite honest, this is one of the first types of things I tried to build myself when I first got started. So it was really cool to see someone sort of go down the same route I did as soon as I learned this sort of material back in the day. And so let's start by cleaning a lot of this up because I don't think a lot of this is needed. I think he just sort of sent me the code, and some of the code from the tutorial stuff I was doing is still in here. These brackets aren't needed. Oh, I accidentally got rid of the semicolon there. This isn't needed. And then we'll shift tab to pull stuff in. So if you highlight a bunch of stuff, you can hit tab, and then shift tab will bring it inwards so you can kind of better format. So he's got some dialogue. So how do you make this into a game? So there's some basic dialogue here. You can kind of read it yourself. Yeah, it basically, you cast a spell at something, then you choose, this dialogue comes up, choose, you'll see in a second when I get this to run. We got attack 1, attack 2, investigate. So it's supposed to be a choice. So you type in 1 or 2 to get different results. So let's first take a look at what we got here. So these if statements are the first thing that stand out to me. This is something a lot of people did, and I think it's because I didn't fully explain this. I'm pretty sure I went back and checked the videos, and I said semicolons go at the end of every line, and then when I talked about if statements, I didn't clarify that semicolons go at the end of every line except certain ones. So stuff like if statements and while loops don't need semicolons at the end. Because now see, this is going to be tricky to explain, but you want these brackets around your after your if statement. Technically you don't need them. Technically this works fine, because what will happen is it'll see the indentation, and then the indentation will do whatever's indented will be the part of the if statement, and then it'll, whenever the indentation stops, that's when it considers the if statement has stopped. But that's kind of how the compiler sees it. It's kind of hard to understand sometimes. Well, not understand, but sometimes the compiler can get a little weird, I find. That might not be exact proper terminology, but I find that if I have the semicolon or the squiggly brackets here, it's, yeah, sorry, clarification. Whenever I misspeak, I'm going to try and reinforce the proper thing. So when these squiggly brackets here are around the printfs, or around whatever chunk of code you happen to have in your if statement, you know that's the exact chunk of code that if statement is going to be executing. So with that being said, if you add a semicolon here, what happens? So basically the way the code sees this is sort of like the code considers everything in the chunk after the if statement to be the if statement's code. But as soon as you add that semicolon, it sees it more like this. So it sees an if statement, semicolon, that means the if statement's done, finished, and then a chunk of code. And this is technically valid code, because you can add these squiggly brackets around anything, and all that does is declare a scope. And so now we're getting into more complicated stuff, which I'll re-explain later, but just know that scope pretty much declares the scope of a variable. So if I declare these int whole numbers here, I think I'll get a bunch of errors. Yeah, whole number undefined, whole number undefined. Why is it saying these things are defined even though they're right there? Because I put them in this specific scope. So when you add brackets around something, you say it's within this scope. And so once you leave this section of code, then these values no longer exist. Just take that at face value for the time being, and I'll further explain how that works later on in a further lesson. But so basically you can declare stuff like this, and so how the compiler sees it is it sees if statement, semicolon, if statement's done, finished, okay, execute next line of code, which is this specific source of, or specific scope of code. And so because there's a semicolon at the end here, what's going to happen is it's going to seem like it's always getting in, but in fact what's happening is it's just finishing the if statement, doing nothing, thinking that it has nothing, no chunk of code to execute anyways, and then just printing or just executing the next couple lines as if they're not part of the if statement. So that was a common problem people had. So no semicolons at the end of your if statements. And honestly, this is a super common thing, and it's sometimes really hard to pick up on because the compiler doesn't throw an error about this. It doesn't care. It's just like, oh, you put a semicolon at the end of the if statement. It'll throw a warning, but it won't throw an error. So that's a common mistake that even I had that the other day. I was fairly tired and I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and I accidentally had a semicolon at the end of my if statement. It took me 10 minutes or so to figure it out. So yeah, that's a common mistake, not even for rookie people, but even experienced people sometimes make wrong semicolons in the wrong spot, and then that one can actually be tricky to debug and find because it doesn't actually throw an error. Okay, so next up, doing the cin whole number here. So I'm not sure how this misconception came, but cin whole number, all that would do is when this finishes, this would probably return 0 or 1. I'm not sure which. It would just be probably 0. Or would it be... You know what? Let's find out. Let's run the code and figure it out. That's what I love about coding, is if you don't know about something... Right, guys. So, Cam Studio ended the recording, and then I actually fixed it and then recorded it for half an hour more. And then Cam Studio messed up and didn't actually save my 30 minutes of footage after this point, so I'm going to have to redo everything I just explained. So, hopefully it won't take 30 minutes to do, though. So we were about to... I went back and watched, and we were about to figure out what happens if you try and run this thing with it being inside. And so if we give it something, it actually does get inside. So what's happening here is after this operation is finished, it operated properly, so it's probably returning 1, which is true, and then it gets in here. Right, so where the heck were we with this stuff? Because like I said, I have to come back now after spending half an hour doing something else. Well, I went through and explained all of this stuff, and then just lost it, so I'm kind of discouraged at this point. But let's see if I can bring this back. Okay, so here we go. So this text-based stuff. Cin whole number. This makes sense. So what he was probably trying to do here was he was probably trying to do something like... well, let's name these variables a little better. So whole number should really be something like choice 1, and whole number 2 should really be something like choice 2, I think. And then this makes sense as whole number, except we want to probably make this something more like input. And then give it that, and then semicolon at the end. So input in here, input in here. Basically replace whole number everywhere with input. And I think the intended purpose here was to do something like input equal to choice 1. So if it's equal to choice 1, then do that. If input is equal to choice 2, do this. But here, I'm not sure what the plus equal input was supposed to be, but based on what he's saying in the dialogue, I think it's supposed to be that input, if input equals choice 1, which is 1, then, you know, display this data. The problem with this whole system right now is that if you put in something other than choice 1, it's not going to scold you for that. It's just going to skip the printing that. So what you probably want to do to make this work right is while input is not equal to choice 1. So if it's not equal to choice 1, then just keep looping. So just to make that clear, so if input is not equal to choice 1, which is 1, so if you put in anything other than 1, then it's just going to keep doing this over and over again until you put in 1, and then it'll print this and then get out of this while loop and move on. You're probably going to want to put a while loop over this next section as well. So if input is not equal to choice 1 and not equal to choice 2. So if at any point either of these are true, it'll get out, because both of these statements would have to be true to operate properly. So if input is not equal to choice 2. So if input is not equal to choice 2 and not equal to or if input is not equal to choice 1 and if input is not equal to choice 2. So if it's something like 3, if input was equal to 3, that's not equal to 1, and if it would not be equal to 2, thus both these statements would be true and it would get in here. But if at any time if input is equal to 1 or if it's equal to 2, one of these would return false and it would fail, because this is an and it requires both to be true for the whole statement to be true. I hope that makes sense. I really do. Let me know if ands and ors need further explaining. I almost feel like we need some sort of crazy visual Minecraft video on it, but I don't know. I don't think it's necessary, and I can't even think of how you could do it visually. So this should do what we want it to then. Maybe. Let's run it and find out. So push something like 2. Just keeps asking for input over and over again until we hit 1. Then it displays the dialog. Here's the problem though, is that input after hitting 1 would be equal to choice 1. So before we get into the statement, we should reset it back to 0. There's better ways of doing this sort of dialog tree stuff, which we'll get into later. But for now, so we hit 1. It now says, okay, so training forest. A rogue elf approaches you from a tree. Type 1 to cast a spell at him. If you type 1, then you create a huge fireball and you hurl it at the elf. It engulfs him, leaving him in a pile of ash. You see something moving in the bush. Do you 1, attack whatever's there, or 2, investigate? So if we hit something like 6, we're going to get in here, and 6 is not equal to 1 and not equal to 2. So once we get past both of these if statements failing to get inside of their code, it'll just loop again and ask us for input. So if we get rid of this breakpoint so we don't stop there every time, we can type in whatever we want as long as it's a number. Yeah, there we go. Stopped hitting the breakpoint now until we hit 1 or 2. And if we hit 2, display some more dialogue, and I had hit F5, not control F5, so it just closed immediately. So hit 2. As you walk over to the bush, the goblin jumps out and claws your face. Blood gushes from the open wound. You quickly pull it off and break its neck. Your sensei walks up behind you. You have done well, my son, he says, as he passes you a small sword and a wooden staff. So that's a basic text adventure. A lot better ways of doing this, but for what we have, this is really awesome, just seeing someone like start to put things together. A lot of mistakes, but I feel like a lot of those mistakes are probably my fault for not explaining properly. But the more I explain this stuff, hopefully the better I get at it.